Hello. Hello, one and everyone. Um, this morning I'm just gonna jump right into some wholehearted um, uh, structural plagiarism and just do try my best to do a Chapo style reading series for this article that popped up for me. Trying to take a look at the ongoing situation in in Ukraine, which, truth be told, I think is going very well. Obviously, it's bad that a war happens at all. Um, but as far as outcomes go so far, and I'm sure that because of the power of my negative fate, the power of my crazy talk, um, I am making World War III happen by saying and believing this right now. But it does seem like it's going the best possible way that such a war could go. That a hubristic and disorganized imperial aggressor is being foiled at nearly every turn by a noble patriotic resistance. It's fucking Star Wars. It's fucking XCOM 2. Oh. Well, at the same time, it's also as XCOM 1 because the entire world is in kind of in a de facto state of not super comfortable with Russia doing this as a starting point. And now, since everybody, I think, is starting to see which way the wind is blowing, people are a lot more comfortable hopping on the bandwagon, which is in and of itself kind of a disappointment, right? In and of itself, like an illustration of the fact that this changes nothing, which is what one hopes for out of a war. There is always a war in the perfect story. I had some revelations about my grand unifying theory of the perfect story last night. I realized what it's called. The theory is called the hero and those who journeyed with him. Alternatively, the hero and those that traveled with them. Need to, settle on whether I'm making on, oh boy. Just by virtue of Battlestar Galactica being on the list, I need to reassess whether I can use him in it. I mean, that's kind of the paradox of Starbuck, though, right? That they basically are, they're a woman, but they also are the toughest, machoest motherfucker there. Anyway, there's always a war in a perfect story, and it's always a war that changes things. It's always a war that is the accumulation of inevitable and otherwise irreconcilable tensions. And even if parts of either side rightfully, realize that war isn't the answer, the destruction of like an arch enemy still happens. And the war is always fought for good reasons on both sides. Both sides think they're doing something good. And this is advanced. You look at the foundational sort of texts that achieve mass appeal that people are familiar with, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and their version of the hero's journey. I don't know if really reckons with either war is bad beyond, I'm thinking especially in Harry Potter here, the very sort of liberal, oh, war is bad when I have to pay attention to it sort of thing. But even more so, like, everybody, all the bad guys, as far as I know. I'm an illiterate jackass, so don't take my word for anything. But as far as I know, there's no reconciliation with the armies of Mordor about them actually having a good point. You know, about there being a possible perspective that could allow you to see that they're doing what made sense to them. It's pretty much just like we're straight up evil. We straight up want unbridled power to destroy and rule as we see fit. Same with Voldemort. Voldemort, as it's supposed to be pronounced. Same with Voldemort and Voldemort's army. They just seem to be bad guys and racists. And I suppose maybe if you're writing from that like hardcore centrist traditional liberal, oops, I'm slipping to the right with every passing 5-year block of my life. Uh-oh, hey, I'm a bigot now. I was like if you're in that very specific sort of spot on the spectrum as someone like J.K. Rowling, where you're like, yeah, outright racism is bad. I mean, one of the tropes in Harry Potter is that racism, discrimination between full-blooded magic users and muggles and or half-breeds. The racism against those sorts of humans is bad, but discrimination against other sentient species is good and only really logical if you put any thought into it. Like the centaurs want to live in the woods and be animals. They want that. What's the elves, the house elves, they want to be slaves. It's hard to not be a slave. You got to do everything for yourself. It's a lot easier for the house elves if they're slaves. The goblins, they want to be Jews who run the banks. That's just what they want. When you're in that very specific political social headspace that J.K. Rowling and her work clearly occupies, maybe Voldemort's army does occupy that space of like, well, you gotta hand it to them. They started from a reasonable place. They were really only carrying the assertions of our culture to their logical extent. And you can't fault them for that. That's not their fault. It's their fault for dressing up like they were like they were all in a Tim Burton movie at the end. If only they had behaved better, the flip reverso of the minorities, expressing their disapproval properly. If only they'd been slightly more polite neo-Nazis, they could have made some serious progress. There's always a war. There's always a point to the war. The war is always the collision of two mutually exclusive ideas, and sometimes those ideas are based off of, selfishness, and sometimes that selfishness, just because it's coming from a place of selfishness doesn't mean it's wrong. No, you're not wrong. You're just an asshole. So it's tempting to look at the Ukraine situation and want to see something like that happening, but it's depressing to look at the Ukraine situation and realize that the international story is just more marketeering. There was some Slavic place, There was some country that has like renowned for the brutality of the specific dictator working there, and he's supposed to, on paper, be aligned with Russia. Um, he was supposed to provide shock troops for this fucking urban warfare that's happening. Um, Not Belarus. It's a different one because Belarus seems to be fully on board with Ukrainian soldiers congratulate Putin on his recent incursion into Kharkiv. Welcome to hell. Jesus Christ. I wish I could find this because it was really enlightening. It was yikes. Okay. I don't want to get too off topic, but some sort of, horrific military junta sort of situation. This guy who demonstrably does not have a heart or a soul. Um, um, if you report the spam messages, then that actually. Report that one too. Then it actually gets it off of the record. That's nice. Unwanted commercial content or spam. Hey, so clearly some guy pulling his forces out of their commitment to help Russia fight in Ukraine that was transparently not somebody having a heart, not somebody like looking at the situation and being like, this war is wrong. Oh. Just another fucking psycho doing the calculus and just seeing that as the tweet I saw it in putting it, the big man is going down and severing those ties now. It's sad to see how much of that same calculus is being done by like the good guys, like US and Germany. Germany this morning, I think, flip reverso on a bunch of pretty hardline policy stuff of like not distributing lethal aid to combat zones and stuff, and just like, okay, you know what, actually, yeah, sure, you know what, let's roll it out, because it's starting to look like, not an analyst, not a strategist, it seems like it's starting to look like an easy PR win for people. It's starting to look less like a drawn out, bloody occupation fought with a insurrection, fought with an insurgency. It's starting to look a lot just like a massive, massive misstep on Russia's part, and an opportunity that, if people act fast, we can all dogpile on them. We can get a really clear delineation of us and them, because the perfect story never really happens. The perfect story is apocalyptic. It makes nations redundant. It doesn't, it's not transformative in that it solves scarcity by creating resources. It solves scarcity by doing away with the systems that artificially prop it up. It does away with markets and borders and tariffs So it's utopian, right? It's a world after it's a world where there are no more foreseeable wars to prepare for, right? That's what peace is. And yeah, under the current system, the current way the world works, sort of maybe this is just, um sometimes you lose on the strategic layer. Sometimes your tactics moment to moment can be spot on, but then you zoom out and you look at what you've accomplished strategically, and the bigger picture is not so. The bigger picture is you painted yourself into a corner. There's a great way to combine those. It's a great way. There's something there to do. um, like maybe that's unachievable now in the world. That there's just too many people with too many preconceived notions about how things have to work, or even just people who know about ways it can work that it would be better if they didn't. Like, it'd be better if we hadn't had markets explained to us, if no one had ever come up with the idea of markets. Not that trade necessarily never emerged, but that, somebody had to first describe a market and no one said no to that person. In the same way that land enclosure started to happen. People started putting up fences and saying, this is mine, and nobody said no. Not enough people said no. There probably were people who said no. So, First World War wasn't that. Second World War wasn't that. Third World War is not going to happen off the back of what's happening in Ukraine right now. Because the system loves itself too much. And this is not a threat to the system. This is I feel dumb thinking this and saying it, but I've already thought it. I want to say that this is international Trumpism. I want to say that the international community's objection to Russia invading Ukraine is not that it is illegal, unsanctioned, unwarranted, evil, but that it is a clumsy performance of empire. It is tactless. It is vulgar. And it's the sort of move that one can only get away with if it works. And the moment it doesn't work, you don't get away with it. And I think we're seeing it not working. I think that's what's really depressing about that sort of hesitation that a bunch of Western nations had before jumping on. Because if it were about the principles, if it were about what the war represents in the sense of like our collective human souls watching something happen and responding to it, then the answer would always be the same. It's the same minute one, it's the same a week later, right? If it's morally, ethically repugnant, if we are the police of the world and it is illegal then we act immediately. We have systems in place that say, you know, if you do something this illegal, then we will immediately pull the plugs that allow you to do that. We will immediately unplug you from financial systems. You will become an isolated, non-functional nation. Because we don't abide actions that are this grossly illegal. That's not the world we live in. Of course not. Of course not. If that were the case, then when America invaded Iraq, which was illegal, which the international community did not condone, then that would have happened to America. But America insisted upon itself enough that it got away with it. And if you get away with it, then you get away with it. If you do it good, which you didn't, speaking as a war, America won't be not forgiven. Oh, I'm so close. Absolved. America will not be absolved for what it did in the Middle East in the early 21st century in the history books. There will never be a text written outside of Texas that proclaims, and this war was the right thing to do because it led to this getting better and this getting better and it solved this problem. Best that particular part of history can hope for is just not being mentioned. That there was so much suffering and discord in the Middle East before and after that the wars that America spearheaded in Afghanistan and in Iraq in the 21st century, that they just look like, how many of you, about the Crusades? Do you know how many Crusades there were? Do you know the sequence of events of each Crusade? I know that in one of them, they only got as far as Istanbul, as Budapest. I don't even know. I know they got as far as a friendly city and then ran out of money and then laid siege to a Catholic city. Just because that's what armies do. They lay siege to shit, and if they get pissed off, then they'll lay siege to you and your friends, because that's how armies work. What I mean is that, they'll be remembered with that degree of non-remembrance of just these historical membranes, these little bubbles that have a bunch of history in them, but unless your goal is to really puncture that membrane, get inside, study that history, then basically just skimming over it and knowing that it exists is enough understanding to consider yourself informed on the subject. I know that the Crusades happened. I know that European kingdoms would send knights into the Middle East to steal holy artifacts or try to reclaim Jerusalem and stuff like that. I know that happened. That's the extent to which, in the grand scheme of history, America's invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq will be remembered. Optimistically. Much more likely, they're sort of preamble paragraphs or maybe even chapters in textbooks leading up to like the downfall of the American Empire. Fought a bunch of pointless wars, failed on a global stage. Spent 20 years fighting fucking kids with rocks and fertilizer bombs and lost. But while it was happening, they got away with it. While it was happening, the military industrial complex made billions, if not trillions of dollars. Private contractors, PMC groups, weapons dealers, manufacturing, people hired to come in and start rebuilding the fucking country, but then just took all the money for themselves, went back home, having accomplished nothing, While it was happening, it was a success in all of the ways that it needed to succeed, which is to say that it needed to serve capitalism. It needed to enrich the already wealthy, and it needed to terrorize the poor. Just play it on a global scale. Ukraine isn't that. Ukraine is people at Trump rallies shouting, Jews will not replace us. It's people showing up to Trump rallies with Nazi flags. It's saying the quiet bit out loud. It's jumping, depending on who you ask, like 100 years back or 100 years forward in the imperial project. It's either trying to reclaim a bygone Soviet empire union, or it is looking forward to a time where Russia, China, and America are the only countries left, and everything else has been absorbed into some sort of, or maybe like Europe as like an entire entity unto itself. Europe, America, Russia, China, and everything else has been through alliance or annexation made part of the same thing. Where the distinction between America and Canada is so purely cultural that it's, it's a formality. Where the legal distinctions between France and Germany and Spain and Greece are all, diluted in the medium of the European Union so much that they operate effectively as a single political nation. And in that future, Russia just projecting out, anticipating that change without anticipating the actual changes that would happen, right? Then yes, the former Soviet bloc countries should be absorbed into Russia. Ukraine should be restored to Russia based off of things like ethnicity, based off of things like, the historical significance of architecture and shit like that. Looking forward in the imperial project, this is exactly what was promised. But that's not how we do it anymore. We don't do the imperial project like that anymore. The empire no longer serves any one nation. We can still pretend like that, but shooting wars are a thing of the past. They're a thing of colonialism. And we don't serve colonial empires anymore. We serve capitalist empires. what Russia should have done, I'm sure some minds are thinking on the right, is, make Ukraine intractably fiscally reliant on Russia, made them, an economic protectorate if they wanted to absorb them in this way. But because they couldn't, or Putin couldn't, if you want to phrase it in terms of like great man theory shit, because they couldn't look past like the old ways of empire, of like ground invasions, as like an actual political end unto itself, or tried to like wage a war of, because that was never the point in Afghanistan or Iraq, right? Like, it's well documented that insurgencies are not defeated by placement of materiel and troops in like traditional fighting organizations. It's just no. Like, India has been fighting on its like northeastern border. I forget the name of the province, but it's this bit of India that kind of juts out into basically like, Muslim land. And there's been an insurrection there for like 18 years. There's been an insurgency there for like 18 years. It ebbs and flows. There's like a specific branch of like the police or the military designed to deal with specifically that insurgency. And it's like kind of effective, but at the same time, like, it hasn't stopped. Doesn't stop. When did when did the IRA insurgency stop? When Ireland achieved its political goals, or moved towards achieving its political goals, because political goals they're always stepping stones towards some other greater future, the future after the Great War, when, like I said earlier, like all delineations are abolished and people just live in peace, because there's not a new war to prepare for. Like, I don't think any U.S. military strategists really thought it was feasible to spend, 10, 15, 20 years in Afghanistan rooting out every hidey hole, every foxhole in which a saboteur could lie. It was just there to justify itself. It was there to, a war on terror was fought with terror. It was an attempt to terrorize the public, the working class foreigner people of those countries, into subjugation. And that was okay to the global community because they were poor people in poor countries who also happened to be brown, who didn't really pray to God in the right way, had this weird language. I think so. That's generally okay. But Ukraine, Ukrainians are white. That's what it is, Ukrainians are white, and I don't think people are going to put up for it, because that's the quiet part, right? The quiet part being like that these systems of white supremacy hurt the white working class as much as they attack people of color. That following Hitler did very little to improve most people's lives in the long term. Some people got their hands on like the liquidated assets of some Jewish-owned businesses. Some people rocketed up to positions of industrial power that were outside their reach only years before. But then after that, it's not like that became the status quo in Germany, that you were constantly rocketing up the promotion ladder. Or rather that, that you would, and it wouldn't involve your immediate superior being taken out back. And so with all that said, I'm strolling Twitter and I come across MSNBC opinion by Noah Rothman, whose ring doth not ring a bell for me. Whose name? Did I say whose ring does not ring a bell? God. I've only read a little bit of this, so maybe there's a turn. Maybe I'll end up agreeing with Mr. Rothman quite a lot. But just from the general tenor that stuff starts out with, I don't suspect. Russia-Ukraine conflict will require American sacrifice to confront invasion. Americans deserve a fuller understanding of what is expected of them. Russia has finally pulled the trigger. At this moment, Russian forces are surging into Ukraine with what Western intelligence believes is the single objective: crush the independent Ukrainian state, liquidate or imprison its most vocal supporters, and force the nation to become a vassal of Moscow. That means that for the second time in less than a year, Joe Biden has been presented with a serious challenge abroad with profound implications for America's role in the world and his presidency. Biden has twice warned Americans that comprehensively confronting this threat with the aim of containing it won't be easy. Average Americans may be expected to make sacrifices if we are to be successful, but Biden has not spelled out precisely what those sacrifices could be. He should. That's true. Politicians should tell the truth. However, right? I mean, this is part of the reason why I loathe Joe Biden so much, is that, like, how long has he been in office, right? Like a few years, right? What year is it? For as long as, I think it's only been just a little bit over a year. But for as long as Joe Biden's been in office, despite the fact that he ran specifically on "I'm not Trump," right? There are still people, I guess, who are so fucking stupid. They think he meant like everything that Trump is, I am not. And not literally, I am at least, not even promising more than, but I am at least 1 point of deviation away from Donald Trump. I am literally not Donald Trump. Not that I am Donald Trump's polar opposite, where he is evil, I am good, but simply I am not the precise sort of evil which he is. And there are still people saying, like, well, why aren't politics honest now? That not, as if by summoning the Antichrist, then it guarantees a savior is born at the same time. I don't think that's how it works, actually. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's actually true. He should. Joe Biden should tell the American people the truth. It's not. That's not his job. It's not what we elected him to do. It's not also. It's. I'm not an American, so I have. There's no we. It's not what you guys elected him to do. Sorry, if you thought that that's what you're doing. It sounds meaner when it's you. It sounds so much meaner. Even if the West is resolute and succeeds in compelling Moscow to stop short of crushing the young Ukrainian state, the weeks ahead will be difficult. Again, written with not really like what my eye on the conflict seems to be having, what the sources I've chosen to pay attention to. It doesn't seem like it's up to America whether or not Russia succeeds in crushing the Ukrainian state. It seems like Russia's in a pretty bad logistical situation, that their tactics are failing their troops, that morale is down, that supplies are short, that they are, like the rocket launches into Kyiv. Like I saw it pointed out that rocket launches aren't and have never really been like effective military tactics unless you know exactly what you're shooting at. Like if you have a very specific target you're trying to hit, then yeah, you can hit it with a missile. But like when you're just shooting them into cities, like that's war of terror stuff. Like you're not trying to hit any strategic post and missing. You're just firing missiles randomly, knowing that the casualties and collateral damage will demoralize the civilian population, which is evil. But it also means that they're on the back foot in terms of invasion. Like if they're resorting to that sort of stuff, if they could just, storm cities, decapitate the positions of power and seize control, and that's what they'd be doing. They wouldn't be haphazardly blowing up oil fields and blind firing into cities. Their tanks wouldn't be running out of fuel on the highway and stuff. So again, sort of even if the West is resolute and succeeds in compelling Moscow to stop short of crushing the young Ukrainian state, the weeks ahead will be difficult. If we fail, however, the future could be indefinitely bleak. Again, maybe it's not about you, really. Maybe it's not a matter of like this historical event will go entirely one way or entirely the other based off of our involvement, right? Maybe it's simply a matter of like, this is happening and there's, as I said earlier, lamenting this, but nevertheless, it seems to be the case. Like this is happening and either you're on one side or the other, or you stood by and did nothing, which is really the side that you're on, I think helping Russia and standing by and doing nothing are so morally indistinct. I actually think that that's not true. Maybe I actually think that like supporting Russia or supporting Ukraine are both, different versions of being really on one side of the issue, that like any of that is worth doing for immediately evident moral or political reasons, like this will make for a more peaceful world in the long run. If you could believe that. But just by ghoulishly sitting back and doing the calculus and hands off it, never again, not in my backyard, but I think to be an isolationist in this situation, to be an isolationist as if, America's participation overseas could even remotely be referred to as such. I think that's even more morally deplorable to just do nothing and just see how it sorts itself out. But that I believe that, but also at the same time don't believe what Rothman here appears to be asserting, which is that like America's involvement will either make or break the Ukrainian resistance. Did I say assistance? Events in Eastern Europe move faster than even Western intelligence predicted they would. As if on cue, the Russia-backed proxy forces that occupy the so-called breakaway provinces in Ukraine's Donbass region unleashed a flurry of military activity. They shelled the line of contact, bombed their own infrastructure, manufactured the rushed evacuation of civilians, and appealed to Moscow for help. Russia responded, as expected, by recognizing the legitimacy of the statelets it fabricated in Ukraine, but Russia's actions both before and after that inflammatory maneuver revealed just how high the stakes of this crisis were about to become. There's a vote here. How worried are you about Ukraine? I am not too worried. Take this, NBC. MSNBC, ad. MSNBC's audience, 82% of the people reading this article, extremely worried. I said not too worried. Extremely worried. Oh boy. Early Sunday, Moscow announced the military exercises it conducted inside of Belarus, which provided political cover to the Russian forces amassing around Ukraine, would not end as scheduled. Moreover, Minsk announced Belarus would host a permanent Russian military presence, thus without its own independent foreign policy, domestic policy, or military, and with the illegitimate Alexander Lukashenko regime wholly reliant on Russian support, Belarus became a Russian vassal state. Which he loves. That guy loves it. Next, just before Russian troops crossed Ukraine's sovereign borders for the second time since 2014, Russian television broadcast a special session of Russia's National Security Council in which Putin compelled all of his deputies to go on record, some with visible reluctance, in support of recognizing the separatists in Ukraine. With that, the whole of the Russian regime is now implicated in the crime to which we're all now bearing witness. I guess, yes. This has so far been a list of the case, yes. Late Sunday night, in a televised address to the Russian public, Putin delivered a rambling justification for his government's territorial ambitions in such an unhinged fashion that his remarks raised doubts about his attachment to reality. I haven't heard that from anywhere else, but I don't not believe it, but I also don't believe it coming from this guy. Putin took listeners on a ponderous journey through times called the origins of the Russian identity in medieval Ukraine. Yeah, the 17th century seizure of the Black Sea coast from the Ottomans, the creation of the Soviet republics by the Bolsheviks, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The arc of the Russian autocrats' bizarre history lesson accumulated in the unguarded assertion that Ukraine has no sovereignty and wasn't gifted them by Russia, in effect, arguing against the nation's right to exist at all. I've seen some amazing posts that just kind of understand war in a single dimension, saying that the only thing that explained this happening was Russian hatred for Ukrainians, and that it was a genocidal war being fought against Ukraine, and not much more this whole reclamation of the motherland sort of thing, And it's just so cool that people get up and say things that are just blatantly wrong, blatantly not true, You do have to be kind of detached from reality to understand how many people will be, hurt in the process of securing the traditional fatherland. to prioritize that over the population of people living in the fatherland who will get killed as a direct result of your trying to snatch it up. But I mean that makes sense as a reason for war, you know? In, as I was saying earlier, like an imperial sort of way, which isn't really how we do things anymore. Like, it doesn't really matter. I think this is really hard to understand for an American audience too, because like Americans say they're all Americans, but like you can tell these people fucking hate each other, right? Like I do not understand arguments against large portions of America seceding from itself, aside from purely like just the feasibility of like, you know, fiscal self-dependence. But I believe I've heard it said that, you know, I think a lot of the woes, I believe I've heard it said that a reasonable explanation for many of the woes in America is that they act like there are like they are a state, when in fact they are a federation. Like that they act much more like a country, right? When in fact, structurally, they are more like the European Union than any of the member nations of the Union. But, you know, they, you know, don't have one president. They have the president of the federation. Each individual state doesn't have a president. Maybe they should. Maybe they should. I think it's really hard to understand for Americans homeland, fatherland, even motherland. Not only because like they're modern people and so they're all packaged up like Pringles, but because they don't know what any of that shit means. Like, I'm Canadian. Although I raised in Nova Scotia. God forgive me. Born in Australia, so I'm definitely an outsider on this topic too. I go back to my homeland and like all the signs are on the wrong side of the street and like the language is all weird. It gives me a headache, and I've been there and like that's good for somebody, right? Having spent like a matter of weeks in their homeland for the duration of their conscious existence, that's good for somebody. But what I mean is, like, aside from like neo-Nazi shit of like blood and soil, which is like, what blood and what soil are you talking about, dude? Like, you're not from here. You're not from here. You know, aside from that sort of stuff, there isn't really a conversation about what those things mean in America. You know? Blue states, red states, south, north, Dixie line, you know. So I think it's really hard for people to grasp that as even like any sort of legitimate emotional compulsion towards a war. That it could seem like a important enough goal to justify a war. Maybe I'm naive, but I believe that. I believe that. Is that a good reason to do a war? Probably not. No, I don't think so. But, you know, you zoom out, and this is why science fiction, I think, is useful and interesting. You know, you zoom out and you imagine a
look at the Expanse. In the Expanse, the evil Laconian Empire, right, takes over the major spoilers for the Expanse. Press stop. If you're in the stream, good. No one's in the stream. That's a relief. Press stop. Big spoilers for the Expanse. In the Expanse, when the evil Laconian Empire takes over the Gate Network and effectively like rules the habitable galaxy, possibly galaxies, we don't know. They take over Sol System. They occupy Earth. And the reclamation of Earth by the Resistance, the liberation of the Sol System, is an important goal for the Resistance, an important benchmark that isn't, necessarily strategically or even tactically viable just because it's such an obvious priority target, But that means that, spoilers, when that eventually does happen, it is a huge victory, right? Like, just imagine being a human with the privilege of being able to participate in a war to retake Earth. Like, that's all you need to imagine to understand what that feeling could feel like. And sorry, if you're gonna be like, I wouldn't do that. I would just live on my spaceship and let bygones be bygones. Then, like, cool, congratulations, man. You're just like not a human. You're just not a real Earth human. You're some sort of freak ass psychopath. Sorry, my dude. So anyway, but yeah, no. I mean, I not to say that I'm sympathetic or think that it's good that like Putin's doing this, but I mean, I understand it at all. I don't think the argument itself is inherently evil. I think stating the argument, therefore violence, is probably unwise. I understand the emotional reality of feeling like that, but at the same time, like, you're Russia, invading Ukraine. No one is going to think you're the underdog here. Nobody thinks you're really, just go on vacation to Ukraine and be like, haha, sweet. So when Putin responded to the manufactured crisis in Donbas, I would say that, like, for those people, it was I just calling it a manufactured crisis, like, there were saboteurs, right? There were double agents, I guess, in this person's telling of the story, right? I don't know that much about those events to speak on them. I don't know enough about any of these events to speak on them. But, like, people really did blow up infrastructure. Like, for the people fleeing from those parts of Ukraine, it was not a manufactured crisis. It was just a crisis. Like, it seems like a very unhelpful line to draw. What the only true crises are the ones that emerge completely outside of the government's involvement. Sorry, there are no crises like that, because the government has a hand in creating the world. A school shooting is a manufactured crisis in the sense that the American legal system's insistence on people having access to weapons that make school shootings possible, right? That's a manufactured crisis. That doesn't have to happen. Even the fucking weather at this point, like the Western coast burning, the center being hit with tornadoes and storms, and the East Coast being sunk under hurricanes. Like that all happening all together is a manufactured crisis by climate change, because we knew climate change was going to happen and didn't do anything about it. Now climate change is happening. I feel like the term is extremely unhelpful on this occasion. So when Putin responded to the manufactured crisis in Donbass by dispatching troops to the newly recognized People's Republic, no one breathed a sigh of relief. Right, yes. The Russian president's solipsistic diatribe. So bad with the slipstick. Related to or characterized by an extreme egocentricity. Themselves, their friends, girlfriends, us, since they look at the front. The only one's mind is sure to exist. Oh, of course. I'm glad I looked it up because I don't think he's using that word properly. Like, I think that's a very MSNBC take on what Putin had to say. I think this is the tenor. This is what I mean when I say there was something about this article that as soon as I saw it, it caught my eye, and I was like, this is some bullshit. Because it's so clearly going to be through this, like, centrist, left of center, liberal, but like Joe Biden liberal. So like Joe Biden liberal sort of take on why any of this is happening. And saying that, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, giving a speech about the history of the cultural legacy of his nation, which is his because he rules it like basically as a dictator by like swapping out with his prime minister or whatever term. So, right? How long's Putin been in charge? A long time, right? Putin. Oh, Putin. Oh no, Putin threatens to axe the nuclear pact. Oh no, do it, man. Assumed office for almost 10 years. Over 10 years. Almost 10 years. President, 10 years. In office, prime minister. Secretary of the Security Council. In office since 1999. He's been in charge forever. His country, right? To say that speaks to an egocentrist's perspective of the world, right? Especially since he stops to talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, yes, the Bolshevik Revolution gave way to authoritarianism, cults of personality. But at the same time, it was a communist movement. The collective will of the people was a grave consideration for that political movement. That's part of the lineage he's working in. To say that it's operating from like an assumption that Putin's perspective, Putin's mind, is the only one that's real, and that there's like, what's the sense in, I think that's a real American take on it, because it's like, what's the sense of a national identity if you've deluded yourself into believing that you're the only true person, right? So So I think they're deploying that word poorly. I think it's dramatic, and I think it's a word you have to double check. But I don't think it's accurate. Like, I'm not praising Putin, but I do think he's trying to accomplish something that ultimately benefits the collective as he sees it, right? Like, just Russia controlling Ukraine thanks to Putin, I don't think is what's enough for Putin. I don't think, reinstating the Soviet Union, rebuilding the Red Army just for the sake of it is enough of a reason to do it. It's just funny how we need to turn. Like, I think, am I thinking accusations of solipsism are in their own way solipsistic? Like, to accuse somebody of having such a simplistic worldview, somebody in such an important position of power and control, because, like, yes, some guy on the street surely can imagine that only his life is real and everybody else is just shades moving around him. But to have ruled Russia essentially for what we've seen of the 21st century doesn't labeling that man as an incoherent, deluded thinker, isn't it just such an easy out for yourself that it kind of belies its own stupidity? Doesn't it kind of, in a very bigoted sort of way, imply that that's how they think? Those other people who aren't us, they don't even fully perceive the world. Their leaders are solipsists. I just, out of all the sorts of speeches that could be given that could point to a world leader being corrupted by a, unreasonable, irrational self-obsession, a history lesson, a brief up to speed, bringing the audience up to speed on the history of the legacy of Russian culture. It seems to be the antithesis of that to me. But Russia's territorial ambitions don't end in Donbass. They may not be limited to Ukraine. On Tuesday afternoon, Biden made good on his pledge to impose sanctions on Russia if any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border. Even some terrorists occupied by Russian proxy forces. Even the terrorists, whatever. Those initial sanctions were restricted on Russian banks. Restrictions on, I guess you can't do reading series if you can't read. Those initial sanctions included restrictions on Russian banks, including, I'm not going to say that, 2 banks. The White House will also restrict Russia's ability to access Western markets and float its debt. in Western indexes. Awesome. The U.S. will join with Britain to sanction Russian oligarchs close to Putin and, crucially, their families. America is also working with Germany to prevent the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from going into service. Finally, Biden announced that the United States would rotate more troops into the NATO-aligned nations that border Belarus, now a Russian satrap, and a staging area for Moscow's military adventurism. How long is this? Oh my gosh. This is a good start. We're almost there. This is a good start. But not be a sufficient. This is a good start, but not be a sufficient response to this level of Russian aggression. Yep, that's what it says. This is a good start, but not be a sufficient response to the level of Russian aggression. This one's not on me. This definitely says this. So Biden promised an escalating response from the West if Russia moved forward with a brazen land grab in Ukraine, which the president correctly predicted was all but inevitable. And yet, Biden also reiterated a point that he made only as an aside last week when he warned that defending U.S. interests in Europe would not be painless. Defending freedom will have costs, Biden said. We need to be honest about that. But the president didn't elaborate. He only cryptically alluded to the robust action he would take to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump.
He wasn't specific enough. You only sort of mentioned gas. You didn't explain it to me. I don't understand. What's going on? But Daddy Biden, tell me.
This guy fucking sucks shit. This guy sucks so much. It's so obvious. It's so obvious that America's fucking terrified he's going to increase gas prices. Like, it's so funny to see all of the lenses of like the American culture war thing, which have just had nothing to talk about for so long, apparently, just turned against each other and just be like, he said shit, and he said a bunch of bullshit, and he said a bunch of stupid fucking, he said, I said this, I didn't say this, I said this, and why didn't you say this if you were trying to say that? Now that they actually have something to look at, like the real differences in their perspective of like what they consider news. You know, it's so funny, you know, how liberal media outlets keep on just mentioning like, you know, hey, take a break from sort of looking up the up-to-date news coming from the battlefields and shit, the fucking flaming streets in Ukraine. And let's all think about how the Cheeto man was bad at his job and how that kind of, you know, had something to do with this. Because remember when there was a Cheeto in the White House? Fox News is just constantly like, what's Trump currently saying? What's Trump currently saying? He's saying like, a bad war. And people are like, what a prophet. Oh my God, please save us. Or they're talking about gas prices. Gas prices. We're scared of the gas prices. Gas prices go up. They hit a gas pipeline? Oh no, we're going to close the pipeline? Oh no, gas prices. That's what he means. This person's so scared. I'm so scared. There might be a financial repercussion for doing the morally correct thing on the global stage. Oh no. I only like wars where we take oil. Americans deserve a fuller understanding of what is expected from them. The sanctions the West is imposing on Russia will, according to the New York Times, be felt by average Russians in the form of higher prices for food and clothing. Yes. Or even devalued pension and savings account. Yes. Many Russian people, working class people, normal people, are going to suffer immensely from these sanctions, going to suffer immensely from this war. And yeah, I do believe that like this is where the disconnect in Putin is like evidenced, that he's pursuing this goal, which is clearly nationalistic and collectivist, just in its formulation, but he's doing it in a way that will cause a lot of average people to suffer so much they're going to hate him. Like, there's no way, no way he comes out a hero at the end of this war. No way at all. No one's going to praise him for what he accomplished, which, you know, sucks to be you. I know. Sucks to be you. I know it's true. This will not dissuade Moscow from its present towards. Only targeting Russia's energy sector could impose a level of pain that Moscow might be unwilling to accept, and only targeting Russia's energy sector would result in the kind of reciprocity, complicating or even choking off energy exports to the West that Americans would feel at the gas pump. I love how they're like intuiting it out. They're like, what could Biden have meant? Well, only this course of action would lead to that course of action. And only that course of action would have an effect at the pump. Like, this dude's like doing a Q drop. He's like decoding a fucking Q drop from Joe Biden mumbling off mic. Oh, what could he mean by that the pump? Let me see. Biden has so far declined to target Russia's energy sector, but if he is serious about crippling the Russian economy and reducing its capacity to project power beyond its borders, Russian oil and gas will become leverage sooner or later. If an economic warfare of that sort is in the offing, I think in the offering, right? In the offing? I've never heard that phrase. I always thought it was in the offering. Yeah, people also say in the offering, right? Oh my gosh. Nope. You are in the offering. The offering here is entirely about either the Eucharist or the Antronach Forge in Skyrim. Okay. Just an answer. Oil and gas. What could he mean? What could he mean by at the pump? If economic warfare of that sort is in the offing, I hate saying that, you can see why Biden would be reluctant to go into detail about it. Goldman Sachs estimates that a tit-for-tat exercise in sanctioning energy could force oil and gas prices to skyrocket. The reduced supplies would also contribute to already serious inflationary pressures in the U.S., further reducing Americans' purchasing power and contributing to economic anxiety that is sapping this administration of support. If that is the price demanded of Americans in the face of this brazen attack on a global order that has so benefited the world's civilized powers, Americans are most likely to bear that burden. Are most likely willing to bear that burden. Oh, good. But they must be asked for their participation in this exercise. Without buy-in, enthusiastic support for a campaign of economic and diplomatic warfare against Russia will rapidly dwindle. I just love this shit. He's like, he's not fucking paying attention to how politics in his own fucking country works on purpose. On purpose. Like, that's what frustrates me about this. Like, he must know. He must know that politicians don't tell people these things on purpose. He must know that it is not because he is so smart and a real detective, clever boy that he was able to figure out when Biden mumbled something about at the pumps, he probably meant gas prices going up. Like, dude, congratulations for showing you're working, but like, we knew that. We all knew that. and be like, oh, there'll be more inflation. Oh, there'll be more blah, 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 blah. Yeah, because we have a political system that purposefully keeps people in the dark about this shit, that makes their political expression, that makes their anxiety, their economic anxiety, their political expression. Like, that's what's going on here. It's free market politics. We'll just do something over here and not tell anybody about it. And then when the do something over here and not tell anybody about it. And when the people react with panic in the face of the foreseen, because they were obvious if you thought about them, but just like unexplained consequences and side effects, when people panic, when doing the right thing has repercussions, then the market will react negatively and we will be able to move back into our shell of democratic stasis, where we have people like this, boo-hooing, whoa-woing about like, oh, if only you'd explain everything to us in detail, we'd be able to do something productive. Like, we do something productive if only we explain it, you guys didn't freak out whenever we don't explain anything. Like, this is the point. This is it working. And this guy being a fucking cog of being like, well, we did ask to have stuff explained to us and they just didn't do it, is part of the fucking machinery. And he's like acting as if has anything to add, as if he has anything to say that everybody hasn't already figured out. Everybody already just like knows in their fucking blood and bones that this is how it works now. And he's like, I, for one, think the government owes it to the public to explain what they're doing. Oh, thanks, bud. We hadn't thought of that one before. Yeah, that'd be a really good... Yeah, let's make that how we do things from now on, actually. All thanks to this fucking guy. Same can be said of Europe. Gas prices in Europe, which is far more reliant on Russian energy exports into the United States, and which will likely waver in its resolve to confront the menace in Moscow sooner than their partners on the other side of the Atlantic. Again, just like presuming that, like, oh no, we won't be able to drive their cars. There's nothing we can do then. We just need to let Russia take Ukraine. We'll cave. As former Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev snarled. Give this guy a voice. Welcome to the brave new world where Europeans are very soon going to pay 2,000 euros. It looks like it says 2 euros for 1 cubic meters of natural gas. I'm so confused. Do euros put a dot in? Oh, Twitter's added a little flag for this person's a Russian government official. Yeah, it's like, what's this guy doing? What's this guy doing? Like, hey, I think it'd be good to do this war. However, let me point out what the enemy said they would do to us. And that sounds pretty nasty. What they said they'd do to us. I'm just urging caution here in the face of the threats our enemies have made in order to dissuade us from fighting them. I think we should hear them out. This guy's a fucking spineless piece of shit. Washington should meet this threat by seeking to fill the gaps left by Russia's energy exports. That would likely require the Biden administration to repeal its executive orders halting gas and oil leases on federal lands and eliminating executive agency spending on subsidies fossil fuels producers. Yes! And we will control the market, and we will perform the climate change, and we will have the money as the oceans boil and the forests burn. This guy rocks. This guy rocks so much. Okay, let me see if I can. Yeah, look, almost there. It would commit the federal government to a crash course program expanding our liquid natural gas export capacity. And it would involve promoting speculative investment in the development of new wells. If the president is serious in his desire to confront what promises to be a drawn-out crisis in Europe, he had better be prepared with a long-term strategy. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. A full-scale invasion of Ukraine should be met with all of the consequences the United States can muster. Biden should declare that commitment from behind the resolute desk in a primetime address to the nation from the Oval Office. The president should not assume that Americans are unwilling to hear the cold, hard truths about what is about to happen. Failing to level the public for fear of how they might take the bad news isn't just condescending. It risks undermining what may be a presidency's defining mission for Biden, ensuring that his name doesn't go down in history as the American president who didn't sell Europe all of the oil. Who lost Europe is what MSNBC decided to publish here. This is hilarious. I did not expect the turn it would take. I feel silly for not anticipating it sooner. This rocks. Turning it into a sales pitch for expanding natural gas as a market play. And phrasing it all in the sense of like worries, well, but if we do this, they might do that. And then we'll have no choice but to make a lot of money. Spineless pieces of shit. Motherfuckers, one and all of them. Long live Ukraine. Peace in the Middle East. Down with Putin. I'm out.